Is Chairman Powell central banker to Europe? I mean, Draghi's getting plus accolades right now, but is really the European dynamic, the economic dynamic, is it dependent on what the American central bank does?
I think it's not just the ECB, but all central banks. You just look at the change in communication of the Fed and how the rest of the developed markets and emerging market central banks followed. It is true there is a common factor there behind all central banks, and that is weaker than expected inflation and core inflation. We're seeing that in the US with core PCE below 2%. We're seeing that in Europe with core inflation at below 1%, and a bit globally. So I think, yes, there's an influence. There was a change, of course, of the Fed that influenced the ECB, but it's also this common factor, low inflation, that is very persistent and is changing the tone of the central banks.
Well, you know, I look at it, the tone of the central banks and the dynamics that we've seen in the last couple weeks here. What I would note, Antonio, is a shift to optimism on GDP in the U.S. We saw that clearly within the Atlanta Fed GDP Now statistic. Are we going to say the same thing in Europe? I mean, is there a great miscall on European gloom?
I think that Q2 and the second half of the year looks a little bit better. Part of it is fiscal. You're going to have a more accommodative fiscal stance in all the probably big 3 and big 4 euro area countries, maybe also out of the UK. So I think that will be helpful. I think the key is what we discussed at the beginning with you and Francine. It's what will Trump do with Europe if they stops the war with China? Will it refocus the attention to Europe? And if it does, it can be very, very painful. So I think that is key. Without that, assuming that doesn't happen, with better fiscal and China doing a bit better, you should have a better second half of the year for Europe. Not dramatically better, but clearly better.